Russia sent a couple of planes to Beirut for evacuation of Russians in Syria. Is this the beginning of the end game?
No. We made a statement today, the ministry explained. The planes delivered humanitarian assistance, another dispatch of humanitarian assistance. We have been regularly supplying humanitarian assistance to all Syrians. And we just informed the Russian citizens who reside in Syria, mostly those are women who married Syrian citizens, that there would be an opportunity to take them out because some of them expressed their desire to wait out this tough period in Syrian history, and about 100 of them decided to use those planes to go to Russia to spend time with their relatives.
So compared with the numbers in Syria, 8,000, I think, registered Russians and about 24,000.
No, I think it's less of those who are registered, but most of them are not registered. 3,000 or 5,000, I don't remember exactly, of them have been registered with the consulate authorities of the Russian embassy in Syria, but much more did not. But among those who expressed their interest to get out for the time being, only about 100 expressed the willingness to use these two planes to go to Russia. It is not an evacuation in any sense of the word.
Russia has been blocking in history a number of UN resolutions. Why?
Well, you know, the vote which Russia and China undertook, vetoing 3 resolutions in a very short period of time, was a reflection of our responsibility vis-à-vis the United Nations Charter. Veto is not a privilege, veto is not something of a caprice. Veto is an inherent right of the permanent members under the United Nations Charter. And it was agreed when the UN was formed by the founding fathers that they should not repeat the unhappy experience of the League of Nations, which was based on the principle one country, one vote, a democratic principle on the surface, but this particular principle did not allow the League of Nations to act properly. And as you know, the Americans were not happy, they dropped out. So it was the American insistence in 1943 through 1945, when the new world organization was discussed in the midst of the World War II, it was the American insistence that there must be special rights for the key powers. And therefore the veto right reflects the conviction of the founding fathers that unless the key powers agree, any decision would not be working, would not be productive, and would not deliver, basically. Therefore, the principle of the veto is enshrined in the Charter, and every single UN member who signed the Charter and ratified the Charter accepted this. So we exercised our responsibility not to allow the Security Council to pass resolutions which were under Chapter 7, which contained threats of sanctions and which contained the very realistic risk of outside interference. Our conviction was that we should be based on the decisions which the Security Council adopted already before those vetoes have been used, namely the statement of the chairman of August 2011, which was initiated by Russia, and then the resolutions 2042 and 2043, which developed further the principles embodied in the original document, namely that the Syrians themselves must resolve the crisis, that the violence must stop in all its forms by all parties, that the all-inclusive Syrian dialogue must be encouraged by the international community, and that there should be no way for outside interference. As I said, this was further developed in the 2 resolutions which were adopted on the basis of the 6-point plan of Kofi Annan. On the basis of this plan, observers, UN observers, have been deployed in Syria. And on the basis of this plan, an action group meeting took place in Geneva in June 2012, which produced a consensual document containing all the necessary components to stop the fighting and to start the political process. It is not through our fault that this document has been frozen since, because the people who signed up to this document, when it came to the practical implementation of the Geneva Communique, was saying, well, it's okay, but before anything, Assad must go. This is not part of the Geneva consensus, and not because we are protecting Assad from his people, not at all. We frankly don't care about personalities. What we care about is the fate of the Syrian people, is the fate of Syria as a united, sovereign, independent state, which is multi-confessional, multi-ethnic, and which was home for so many religions, for so many ethnic groups, and they have been living there in peace and relative prosperity, frankly speaking. Of course, the political problems which motivated the opposition to protest have been there. We are not denying them. The authorities made many mistakes. They did not respond to the legitimate requests from the opposition for too long. And then the protests degenerated into violence on both sides. And now we have been, unfortunately, witnessing further militarization of the conflict, with the opposition gaining more and more ground, getting support from outside, and the government, of course, responding to the violence of the opposition, which was, in its turn, motivated by the government mistakes. So it's a vicious circle. And we have to be absolutely clear that any threats from the Security Council would be immediately used by those who would like to provoke outside interference. Because you can, well, when you threaten, you have to have some monitoring mechanisms to see how all sides behave, because there are more than two sides in Syria. The opposition is not united. The opposition is acting against the government parallel with quite a number of terrorist groups. One of these groups have been designated as a terrorist group by the United States, which caused protests from the national coalition of the Syrian opposition. So it's a very bad and very complicated mix. So whatever we do, our priority number one must be to put aside all the claims, all the pretexts, all the preconditions. If our priority is to save lives, then we have to tell them now, without any preconditions, stop fighting. All of those who participated in Geneva, they provide a combination of outside actors having influence on one or another Syrian party. And if we all, in a synchronized manner, tell them to stop fighting, to designate their delegations to negotiate an interim transitional governing body, and then to empower this body with the preparation of the new constitution, preparation of the new election, this is the only way, if we are all sincere when we say that we want to save lives and not to allow the violence to continue. And all this is embodied in the Geneva Communique, which we still believe can be implemented and must be implemented without any preconditions. If, on the other hand, the priority of some of our partners is not to save lives, but to depose Assad, to remove Assad one way or another. And Assad is not going to move. He said this publicly, and he would not listen to us, to the Chinese, to the Iranians, to no one. He said, I am Syrian, I was born here, I am protecting my people, and I would die in Syria. So if people believe under these circumstances, having heard his position, that before anything political can happen, he must be removed, then of course this is a position which we have. But those who promote this position must understand that the price for this geopolitical goal to remove Assad, the price is more and more lives of civilians in Syria. So we have to make a choice. Either we want to save lives, and then we have to forget about who is responsible for the time being and to bring all of them to negotiating table. Or if we don't care about lives and care about Assad's fate, then of course no one can really help.
You were there last year in February to speak with Assad. What was your impression at the time being?
Well, our impression was that he's not really getting in line with the events. He was a bit more in the thinking that history is on his side. He was responding to our appeals to speed up the reforms, and he said that this would be done, this is on my plan, this is on my schedule, but unfortunately he announced those reforms only a few months later. Well, February was already late for the reforms. Had the reforms been announced in the summer of 2011, things might have went different way. The substance of the reforms went in the right direction. It was a multi-party system for the first time in so many decades. It was a new constitution allowing for this multi-party system, the law on mass media, the law on local government, something else. And they held the referendum on the new constitution, as you know. They held the elections. The government is now, technically speaking, is composed of the governing party and the opposition parties, but it was a bit late. Now, President Assad in January introduced a new plan inviting all patriotic opposition who is against outside interference to sit down, to have a national dialogue and to develop further the legislative reform and to prepare for new elections and to draft a roadmap for new Syria, which was rejected by the opposition. And I think that this is a mistake. Yes, these ideas of his, they are not probably satisfactory to all. And if you ask me, I would also believe that we might suggest some, improvements in what was proposed. But it is something which is moved forward by the acting president of Syria, and which is about dialogue and national reconciliation, saving the country from total destruction, saving the country from falling into pieces. And it's a proposal which is, with all its inefficiencies, potential inefficiencies, I would say, which is formulated in the context of political dialogue. When the opposition says this is rubbish, we don't accept this, maybe they don't like a lot in this proposal, maybe they don't like it at all. But the opposition is not offering any political alternative. The only thing which is uniting the opposition is toppling the regime. And this could also be understood. They don't like this regime, they have been tired of this regime, but the opposition during all these almost 2 years never produced any constructive platform. When this national coalition was formed in Doha at the meeting of the various opposition groups with some Western countries, the Gulf countries, Turkey helping them, they declared the creation of this coalition as a unifying mechanism, and they adopted a statement saying that the main goal of this coalition is to topple the regime and to dismantle its structure, which is absolutely against what the Geneva Communique said. In Geneva, everyone agreed that we have to have a transitional period, but the structures of the country must remain untouched, not to repeat the mistakes which were made in Iraq, for example, when the entire system, when the entire government system was destroyed by the American occupation force. So, I would really like, and we meet with the opposition groups, with all of them, and we challenge them. Guys, we want you to be part of the solution. Therefore, okay, you hate the regime, but you must have some agenda for your country, not for the regime, for your people. An agenda which would spell out your political vision of how you get to a new Syria. And they, so far, for the 2 years, they failed to produce one.
What actually, in geopolitical terms, is the issue in Syria in that context? Why we do so have so many players in Syria?
You know, we in our attitude towards what is going on in Syria, we are not basing ourselves on any geopolitical considerations. We don't have any considerable vested interest, egoistic vested interest, economically, militarily, or otherwise, in the Syrian situation. Well, marine bases could be, used, could be changed as far as location is concerned, but geopolitical context is being introduced not by us. The people who say the regime must be changed, they are driven, willingly or unwillingly, by the well-known notion of the greater Middle East and North Africa, introduced many years ago by George Bush Jr., who said that democratizing the Middle East is our utmost goal. I think any interested observer who follows what is going on in the region can make his or her own conclusions as far as the results of these democratization move are concerned. And we have more and more problems in the countries which have been declared at some point by the Americans, for example, as beacons of democracy. The problems are still far from being resolved in Afghanistan, in Iraq. We have quite troubling situation in Egypt, where they still have to find some solutions which would be uniting the nation. We still have a lot of problems in Libya. We talked to the new Libyan authorities. They're interested in continuing our cooperation, but they really face huge problems as far as the central government exercising its authority all over the territory of Libya is concerned. And if you look down south, the people who were part of the coalition toppling the Gaddafi regime, probably they only want to fight, and they could not stay in a peaceful condition. So many of them are now fighting in Mali, and they're using the arms, by the way, some sophisticated arms, among others, which had been supplied to them by the Western powers and by some of the regional countries when they were fighting Gaddafi. So it's history hits back. And this spiral of violence really is very dangerous. So since you started your question asking about geopolitical context of this, unfortunately, we have been witness to piecemeal approach. Well, there was a revolution in Tunis. Everyone was thinking how to support this revolution. Then there was a revolution in Egypt, then Libya, then Yemen, then Mali, now Syria. It is not a geopolitical vision. Geopolitical desire to have democracy all over the place, well, as a general avenue of the development of the humankind, it's absolutely logical. But it is not constructive, and it is absolutely counterproductive to say that it's only the Western type of democracy which must prevail. You cannot have Western type of democracy in Afghanistan, where they have centuries-old traditions, same in Iraq, same in Iran, same in Egypt. There must be understanding that the key principles of free elections, for example, and market economy, they are underlying factors of any more or less successful development of any nation. And more countries come to this conclusion. but to impress upon the countries with long history, very ancient civilizations, the nitty-gritty, which are understandable by the West, but which are very foreign to those countries, which relates to how exactly to organize this democratic and market economy process, is really self-defeating and could only create a situation where this impressive and imposing attitude would fire back.
We have countries like Saudi Arabia, we have Qatar, we have Iran, we have Turkey, we have Syria, and we have Israel in the region. So a number of these countries are not very well known for democratic progress in the past anyway, because they are kingdoms that have an own agenda.
Well, I think if you speak about Israel and Iran, they do have democratic traditions, different. Israel is a democracy and no one can challenge this from any point of view. Iran, yes, they have some filters in the electoral system, for example. But when these filters have been overcome by the candidates, then there is a real fight, real electoral fight. And you cannot deny this. But again, it reflects the specific features of the society. And you cannot really demand that now, immediately, here and now, everyone must satisfy the criteria which, for example, OSCE establishes. OSCE was helping to organize elections in Afghanistan. And we all know that the OSCE was wise enough not to apply the same criteria as it applies to some European countries. Though OSCE normally applies different criteria to the countries of the former Soviet Union and to the old democracies, which is a double standard in any case.
Yeah. Let me come back to the serious attempts in Syria to create a kind of settlement in between the opposition and Assad. Kofi Annan started his job in February last year. Who elected Kofi Annan at the time, and why did he fail at the very end?
Well, the first part of your question is very easy. The Secretary General of the United Nations and the Secretary General of the Arab League asked Kofi Annan whether he would be interested in getting the job, being the joint representative, joint special envoy of the United Nations and the Arab League. He agreed, and this was brought to the Security Council, and the Security Council welcomed the appointment. And we supported this strongly. But before I go further into the theme which you touched upon, I would like to say a few words about what preceded the Kofi Annan's appointment. Kofi Annan's appointment was preceded by the Arab League initiative in November 2011, which we strongly supported. And the initiative was about the need for the government and the opposition to stop fighting and to deploy the Arab League monitors to check whether this ceasefire is being observed. We took some efforts to persuade the regime in Syria to support the initiative because they didn't want to originally. And the opposition also pledged to cooperate. Then the Arab League observers were deployed in Syria. They started working late November. And after 1 month or so, after their presence in Syria, they submitted their first report to the Security Council, which was not just one-sided, which was saying that there were violations on both sides. And they gave examples of the ceasefire violations as they saw it by the government, but also by the opposition groups. And this apparently was not liked by some people who wanted the change of the regime in Syria. So before even the Security Council could consider this report, the mission was aborted by the decision of, not even of the Arab League, but by the Gulf Cooperation Council members. And the observers had to withdraw. So, just to make a point, the moment the mission tried to present some objective picture, blaming not only the government but also the opposition, it was withdrawn. Then come Kofi Annan, who presented his six-point plan, well-known six-point plan, end of violence, no outside interference, the government is responsible, but the opposition also must take its own responsibilities, cessation of violence, international monitoring, beginning of the dialogue. We supported this plan, and we supported the dispatchment of the UN observers. And again, we explained to Damascus that it is important for them not to object, and they agreed. So the observers, the UN observers, were deployed, and they were reporting also in an objective manner, registering the violations on both sides, the government and the opposition, and they were examples quite numerous, including violation of international humanitarian law. And these observers were there under very strenuous conditions. They have been part of the continued pressure and sometimes even armed provocations. And I talked to the chief observers, including in Geneva when on the 30th of June 2012, they were present at this action group meeting. I don't want to mention names, but they admitted that they had much more trouble from the opposition than from the government side. And this observer mission apparently also was moving in the direction of trying to present a more objective picture of what is going on. And then, as they were reporting in an objective manner, they came under more and more pressure, including some violent pressure, some provocations, and they had to withdraw. My point is that these two examples indicate that there are some people who are not interested in international monitoring of the situation, who are not interested in international, be it Arab or be it UN observers, to be on the ground as a stabilizing factor, exactly because this is a stabilizing factor. And these people want to destabilize the situation and to provoke, the outside interference on the basis of igniting tension, using the government disproportionate actions as a pretext.
Who is they?
Well, I think those of your viewers who follow the situation would have to make their own choice. I think they know the facts.
Could I just come into, he went down, Kofi Annan went to Assad. He came back, he visited you in Moscow. On the 16th of March he had been in Damascus, and then later on the 24th he came to Moscow. What was his first report as far as the flexibility of the Assad regime was concerned? Well,
his first report was that if we manage to stabilize, even relatively to stabilize the situation with these international observers, then he would be really counting on those countries who have more influence on the opposition to push the opposition into a dialogue with the regime. And as I said, in Geneva, we never agreed on any preconditions. It was just stated that the government and the opposition must stop fighting, must appoint negotiators, and these negotiators must agree on the composition and the powers of the transitional governing body, which would exercise the full executive authority and which would also exercise the authority over the law enforcement forces and the security forces of Syria. So when this Geneva communique was adopted, Damascus had its doubts. And again, we engaged our resource, if you wish, and persuaded Damascus to say that they are prepared to work on this basis, in spite of the fact. And it was not easy for them, because they were saying, no regime change, we don't want to discuss any transition because we have elections in 2014. But then they said that they would be ready to work on the basis of the Geneva communique. And all those who are assembled in Geneva committed themselves to make sure that all Syrian parties would do the same. But unfortunately, the opposition rejected Geneva communique, Geneva principles the next morning. And those who have influence on the opposition, be it countries of the region, be it Europeans, be it the Americans, never managed to persuade the opposition to change its mind, to change its confrontational mood. I mentioned about the creation of this Syrian national coalition of the revolutionary forces and the opposition.
In November in Doha.
Yes, and then they adopted, as I said, a two-page statement saying our main goal is not a constructive position, but toppling the regime, dismantling its institutions, and number three, no dialogue with the government. When I called our American friends, my colleague, the Secretary of State, and said, you keep saying that Geneva is the best hope, for us, that this is the basis. But you welcome the creation of the coalition, which said no Geneva, basically, no dialogue, dismantling the institutions. What is the reason for you welcoming this development? Could not you influence them? And they told us, well, it was most important for us to unify the opposition. As far as the platform on which they unified, we can influence them later. A couple of weeks later, there was a meeting of the Friends of Syria with the opposition in Marrakesh, Morocco, and we expected, some change in this absolutely destructive approach by the coalition, but there was none. And then we asked our friends in the US and Europe, you said that you would be able to influence the opposition in the direction of readiness for a dialogue and in the direction of accepting the Geneva principles. And there was no answer. And we asked the same question from the opposition groups. In this very room, we have been meeting with most of them. We also have been meeting with them in Istanbul, in Paris, in London, in the United States, in Cairo. And we keep telling them that we encourage them to respond to what was agreed by consensus in Geneva by the group, which was composed of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, the Arab League, Qatar, Kuwait, Iraq, Turkey, the European Union, and the United Nations. And we tell them, look, this is what we all want from you. They say, nothing before Assad disappears. Look, we cannot influence this wish. We cannot deliver on this. I don't think anyone can. Some people say, let's offer President Assad, some deal. Okay, if somebody is ready to offer a deal, do it directly to President Assad. If people say that without the removal of the president of Syria, it is impossible to have a dialogue, as I said at the beginning of our discussion, they must understand that he is not going to go, not because we don't tell him to, but because he has made his decision. And all those who met with him, including Lakhdar Brahimi and Kofi Annan, they confirm that the impression is that he is not going to go. So those who say that he must go before anything can happen, they must accept the responsibility for more and more Syrian lives, because the war would go on.
There was one historical situation, obviously, in April last year, when a ceasefire was more or less suggested.
That's when Kofi Annan's plan started,
Yeah. Why didn't it work? What happened, actually? Because in the beginning of April, it looked more or less okay, but then things developed.
Well, I tried to refer to this situation in my previous remarks. I believe that there were some people who did not like the ceasefire to succeed, because they had their own, and still have their own agenda, which is the regime change in Syria. And basically this implies, and this involves, the plan to ruin the multi-ethnic, multi-confessional nature of the Syrian, and secular nature of the Syrian state, which would have a disastrous effect all over the region, because in Syria you have Sunnis, you have Shia, you have part of Shia philosophy Alawites, you have Druzes, you have Christians, and you have Kurds. And the Kurdish issue is the one which I am sure not only Turkey but many other countries must keep in mind. Because if Syria disintegrates, I don't know what the Kurdish issue would give all of us.
There was most of the arguments about Syria is a kind of massacre marketing to a certain extent in the public. There was this famous massacre of Hula.
Infamous
Massacre of Hula, you're correct, as far as language is concerned in that context. And it was on the eve of Annan's more or less last attempt to go to Assad at the end of May. And at the very moment it happened, it appeared on the internet, horrible pictures, and it was always connected with the name of Bashir al-Assad. What is your information about this massacre?
Well, it is not my information, it is the information which was proved by NGOs, by independent observers. The village of Hula witnessed disgusting massacre of many members of several Sunni families, but Sunnis who were loyal to the regime. And the attempts to present it as the Alawi making massacre of Sunnis, they were immediately shown on the TV screens, on the internet, and this was not true. And independent observers investigated this matter. They looked into the video images. They saw the ribbons of the colors of the Syrian flag on the hands, on the arms of these murdered people, and they analyzed other information. It was a provocation intended to make the regime responsible, just like the recent terrorist attacks on the Aleppo University, where 82 people died and almost 200 were wounded, was alluded to as a possible act by the regime, including on such a respectful and respected channel as CNN. This was never repeated again, but there was an attempt to drop this thought into the public domain. We have been cooperating with mass media, as you might imagine, as the foreign ministry, for many years, and in a very intensive and open way. And we respect greatly the professionalism and the objective character of the coverage of the events by most of our colleagues. But we also know that sometimes people in the media, willingly or unwillingly, play into the hands of those who want to provoke events or to move the public opinion one way or another artificially, to mislead the public opinion. There were instances when, during the immediate phase of the Syrian tragedy, there were images on quite respected channels of massacre, and they were saying this is the regime killing the civilians, only to find out later by independent observers that the images were some 8 years old and they related to the Iraqi war. And we had our own experience in August 2008 when Saakashvili started war against his own people because he said that South Ossetians are my citizens, so he attacked his own citizens. And the Western channels were showing images of tanks moving into a human settlement in a city, in a village, and saying that's the Soviet troops, the Russian troops, of course, but they almost said Soviet, the Russian troops entering the Georgian city of Gori, while the expert research of these images showed that this was the Georgian troops entering the South Ossetian city of Tskhinval. So things like that happened.
So we are in a psychological war.
Things like that happen. Well, very much so. And those who want to achieve, those who see in this Syrian drama and in this Arab Spring drama in general, those who see in these events not the fate of the not the fates of the people, not the fates of the countries, but those who see their geopolitical chance, they from time to time resort to these dirty tricks. But I want to say once again that this is absolute minority of cases, and that absolute majority of journalists with whom I met, and I have met a lot, and I have many friends among journalists, I respect and appreciate highly their professional and their desire to present an objective picture without making any value judgment.
The result of the Hula massacre was seen a couple of days just later on. Most of the European countries did throw out the Syrian ambassadors, sent them back to Damascus. Did this kill Annan's peace efforts?
I don't know, but the fact that the reaction of the European countries was instinctive, if you wish, and they immediately acted, as you said, is one thing. But maybe in 2 days, as you said, they thrown out, many of them threw out Syrian ambassadors. But 3 days after the Hula massacre, no one remembered about it. It was really dropped from the screens, because by that time, the truth was already understood, and everyone understood who did it. I'll give you another example when people would be prompted to act on the basis of some immediate media news. 1999, January, February, Kosovo, the village of Racek, Ambassador Walker of the United States, who was the chief of the OSCE mission in Kosovo, he arrived to the village of Racek after receiving the information that there was some massacre. He arrived there, and he discovered some 3 or 4 dozen bodies in civilian clothes, all murdered, killed. And he, without reporting to the OSCE headquarters, without having any authority to do this, assembled the journalists and said that this is the act of genocide by the Serbs against Kosovo Albanians. And then the European capitals, most European capitals, say this is the last drop. And that was used as a trigger to prepare and then to exercise the bombing of Serbia. Then the European Union, you might know this, ordered an investigation of this Racek situation. And they hired Finnish forensic experts, and the forensic experts of Finland studied the situation. They discovered that this was not a massacre of civilians, that all these men in their better age were killed not at the short distance, but the nature of the wounds leading to death was like the wounds acquired in a combat, and that the wounds on the body did not coincide with the cloth, distortion. So apparently they were in combat, and then after they were killed, people just changed their military uniform to the civilian dress, and this was quite highly discussed. So I was serving there in New York on the Security Council, and we asked the Security Council to ask for this report to be submitted to the Council, because Racek incident was really the trigger for the war against Serbia without any Security Council permission. Then we were told that it was not the property of the United Nations, it was the property of the European Union. Then we came to the European Union and saying, guys, friends, it's an important thing, it's about the future of Europe, it's about Helsinki Final Act, it's about how you handle conflicts in Europe on the basis of the Helsinki principles. can you share this report with the Security Council? They said, look, we already sent it to the International Tribunal on former Yugoslavia, so it's the property of the tribunal. Then Carla Del Ponte was the chief prosecutor of the tribunal, and he visited New York from time to time. I met with her and I said, Carla, why don't you give it to the Security Council? Well, it's quite confidential report. I don't know why. I said, okay, maybe we can reach a compromise that you would deposit the report with the Secretariat in a secret room, and only ambassadors, members of the Security Council, would come and read the report without making any notes. This was also denied. Then there was some leak that the actual story is, as I told you, that this was a clear-cut provocation. So, but this gave rise to a development which changed the map of the Balkans. So, yes, things happen.
When Ibrahimi came back just recently from Damascus, what did he tell you about the situation?
Well, he's not optimistic. He say that he is trying to send a message about the need to start working on the basis of Geneva, that he wants, to see the regime showing flexibility, and the regime does not say no, but basically does not say yes. The message which the regime gives to Brahimi, as Brahimi told me, is you first deliver on the opposition, because the opposition doesn't even want to accept the notion of a dialogue. And we, the regime, we are ready for the dialogue with those who are not in favor of outside interference, who are patriotic opposition, who think about their own country, and so on and so forth. Then Brahimi, as you might have heard, offered to have a meeting between Russians, Americans, and himself, and we met with Hillary Clinton in Dublin in the margins of the OSCE ministerial meeting, and it was a brief meeting, but the suggestion from Brahimi was, why don't we try in this format to find some way to implement the Geneva Communique. No one denies the Geneva Communique. Everyone accepts the Geneva Communique. But some people say it is subject to interpretation. What kind of interpretation, I don't know. It is a very blunt statement. Stop violence, designate negotiators, compose on the basis of mutual agreement this transitional governing body, prepare for the elections, period. People who say that this requires interpretation, again, raise the issue of President Assad must go, Security Council must adopt sanctions against the regime, and so on and so forth, which is non-starter. The Geneva paper is absolutely unambiguous, and it requires only political will of all those who can influence all Syrian parties in combination. And the action group which assembled in Geneva is the right group of people. To tell the people who are fighting, the same thing and with the same vigor. And it would work. After that, there were 2 more meetings between the Russian and American diplomats together with Brahimi, and we presented this vision. But we had an impression that some people believe that in this format, the main goal is to persuade Russia to change its position. And when we ask, what kind of change do you want? Well, you must tell Assad that he must go. And we answer that Assad's fate must be in the hands of the Syrian people. And that it is not our tradition, not our manner to engage in the regime change. Apart from this, this is political principle, but apart from this, in purely pragmatic terms, he is not going to listen to anyone. And this is a fact which is recognized by all those who have any contacts directly or indirectly with Damascus. So therefore, the longer people insist on having his departure as a precondition for any dialogue, the more lives would be lost.
2 last questions. Is the opposition to be controlled at all? What kind of aim does the opposition have? Is this a united opposition? That's one thing. Or is it more and more different groups with different agendas, and neither the United States nor the Gulf states can control them in the meantime?
Well, I already alluded to this theme when I said that the opposition has failed so far to produce any platform, any political platform, how they perceive the future of Syria. The only thing which they say is Assad must be removed. And that's, in the absence of any other statement, is considered by me as the only unifying factor for the various groups. The Western countries, the Gulf countries, Turkey, others, invested a lot of effort to unify the opposition. And this coalition was created, and I described the political credo of the opposition, which is not really constructive at all. And unless the opposition presents its political vision of the transition, the political vision for Syria, we wouldn't really know whether they are united or not. For example, the one part of those who fight Assad is that group, very tough group, Bajat al-Nusr, which was designated as a terrorist group by the United States, only to see the immediate rejection of this American position by the coalition of the Syrians, of the Syrian opposition. In other words, I believe that for the sake of sticking together, they have to be very eclectic in whom they get under the one umbrella. So we have to see how this evolves, but the key issue is to understand what are their political views. Before any discussion of any change in the personalities, in structures probably, there must be an agreement, an underlying agreement of principle, which would clearly spell out guarantees to all Syrian groups, ethnic, confessional, otherwise, that each of them, each minority, would feel comfortable and safe in the new Syria. And I believe this would be the most important first step in any national dialogue. And the opposition must show that it is really interested in keeping Syria pluralistic in ethnic and religious way. And as soon as such proposals of guarantees to all minorities, guarantees of security, guarantees of the dignified place in the society, guarantees which would make everyone comfortable in Syria, it's only after this has been put on the table and endorsed by all main players that we can practically start discussing persons, personalities, and the structures, and so on and so forth.
Are we marching towards the direction of a kind of rather strange new Cold War? Obama issued an order that the CIA should support the opposition. The Turkish president or the prime minister supports the opposition. Saudi Arabia and Qatar are sending weapons and fighters to Syria. Russia and Iran are accused of sending advisors and weapons. Are we getting in a bigger confrontation in the meantime?
Look, Russia does not send any advisors. I cannot speak for Iran. It is another country. Russia doesn't have any advisors on the ground. Countries of Europe and some countries of the region, they have, and probably, well, the United States openly stated that on the border with Syria in Turkey, they have their special forces instructors to work with the opposition. They don't make any secret out of this. And some European countries and some countries of the region, they do have their special forces in what they call liberated areas of Syria. We know this. We don't have any military personnel inside Syria except a few dozen people in Tartus, where the Russian naval point of...
the Marine base.
It's not a base, it's actually a point where logistical service of the ships is being made. It is too modest, to be called a base. no more military. It's a legitimate, legally sent naval personnel to service the ships who call on the port of Tartus. Others do have special forces, instructors, advisors, what have you. On the supply of weapons, yes, the external supporters of the opposition undertake quite a lot to arm it, including with rather sophisticated weapons. We only finalize the implementation of the contracts which had been signed and which had been paid for, and which are about supplying the Syrian government with air defense systems. The military hardware which we have been sending to Syria is to defend Syria from outside aggression. This weaponry, the air defense systems, they cannot be used in the civil war. But the weapons which are being supplied to the opposition, I hope, the suppliers follow they trace the fate of these weapons, because now all our European friends admit tacitly that in Mali the extremists are fighting with the weapons which were given to them when they were fighting against Gaddafi in Libya. Again, this reflects this. We touched upon this in the beginning of our discussion. This reflects a piecemeal concentration. Well, we have Libya. Well, we don't like Gaddafi. Let's send the weapons to topple Gaddafi, and we don't think what might happen to these weapons after Gaddafi has been toppled. Now the same is taking place in another country. Okay, we have this problem on our hands. There is no serious attempt to take a geopolitical look at how this map of this crucial region is evolving or revolving, because it is not an evolution, it's a revolution. I know that the Western and Russian political scientists are really trying to give this analysis, and probably some secret discussions are taking place inside US, Germany, European countries of what are the real consequences and dangers of these developments. But on the surface, we still hear that Assad must go, we must support the opposition, we must create the government in exile. In other words, my feeling is that people who decide on foreign policy in the West understand much, much better what is going on compared to what they say publicly. And if we speak about partnership, strategic partnership between Russia and the European Union, Russia and NATO, we would like to have strategic partnership with NATO. I think, well, forget about organizations, just, the Europeans, which includes Russia, and which includes the United States, by the way. We are three branches of the same civilization. I think if we seriously want to help stabilize the situation, to cooperate with other civilizations, we have to sit down quietly and have this honest analysis of what is going on, and put aside geopolitical ambitions and think about the fate of this region, of the fate of the people who live there, and then develop some constructive approach which would be based on the need to help create external conditions for the people of the region to be able to resolve their problems peacefully, on the basis of inclusive national dialogue, on the basis of respect of all those groups, ethnic and religious, including Christians, who had been living in this region for centuries and centuries and centuries, in peace with each other. And this peace is being undermined in the front of our eyes. This is very unfortunate.
Last question. Did Kofi Annan, before he resigned, call you and said, I'm going to resign? And what was your reaction if he did?
Well, he said that he would be... Yes, he said that his mandate would be expiring at the end of August, I think, last year, and that he would ask the Secretary General to find some replacement.
And what was your reaction?
Well, I said, Kofi, it's your decision.